everyone. Okay, so yesterday I woke up and I completely lost my voice. So this was great news for my girlfriend on the 4-hour drive up, because it meant I wasn't singing Take That for 4 hours. That's great, but we'll see how we get on today. I've had a few lemp sips, so it's great. Okay, so yeah, like Fiona said, I'm the VP of Creative for Time. Previously at the New York Times, I was agency side for 10 years before that, but I haven't really had the most typical kind of career path, if there is such a thing. Because when I grew up, like, I came from a big military family, so my mum was like, "You're going in the army, like 16 years old, look how well your brother's doing and everything else." I was like, I don't really fancy the army, like, I kind of want to play piano. And, you know, working class mother in the North, she was like, what? It was kind of a bit of a Billy Elliot moment. And she's like, "You'll never have a career in music." So I was like, right, I left home, 17, determined to have a career in music. And I was never really much of a performer in that sense. So I took a music production course, and I was going to be the next Timbaland, and I thought, you know, this is me. Produced a few EPs, did a few remixes, made a lot of connections in the film school. So this kind of transitioned into sound design and Foley and sound effects in film. I made about half a dozen short films. And there really is a lot of creativity in this field, but I still love music. So this turned, I don't know if this is working. No, we'll go back to there, into writing music for film. So I spent years doing this, writing music, loved it, absolutely loved it. I was really lucky enough to work on a few great projects, but it was really quite tough. I had like huge imposter syndrome because I taught myself how to play the piano. I never had any lessons, and I couldn't really read music, so this made things really, really tough. And I didn't really have the attention span to learn the theory behind it. And this is right around the time when motion and editing was becoming a lot more accessible, and you didn't need big studios anymore. You could do it from your room. So I got into that for a while, and that turned into design. And then design became my sort of bread and butter in terms of my career. And I've touched on things like branding, UX, UI. I needed a website, so I taught myself how to code, freelanced in front-end design for a little bit, and on top of this, I completely nerd out on anything physics, space, science related. I've got an encyclopedic knowledge of film trivia, and for some reason I know way more about dinosaurs than any adult male has any business knowing. This is relevant, I promise. But eventually I ended up in this role where I can kind of pull on all these different areas of expertise pretty much every day in what I do. And you might argue that some of the things that I talked about can be considered hobbies rather than jobs. But when does a hobby turn into a job? And some people might say it's how much knowledge you have in a particular area. And others might say, well, it depends if you get paid for it or not. But I know way more about dinosaurs than I do about coding. And I've never been paid to talk about dinosaurs. So I don't know if that's the case. So everyone's heard of this term, jack of all trades. And if you look, it goes by lots of different other names as well. And the problem is with this term is obviously you think of a jack of all trades and it's associated with this idea of being a master of none. And this is not a new thing at all. Like, the warning against being a generalist in your field has persisted for hundreds of years in many, many, many different languages. And yeah, if you look at a couple of these different ones, so I've lost my slide, but yeah, in China they say, you're equipped with knives, but none of them are sharp. In Korea they say, a man of 12 talents has nothing to eat for dinner. Estonia, 9 trades, and the 10th one is hunger. And then in Latin, something from all, but nothing in total. So people think it's bad. Like, why? I don't get it. Like, it can't be as bad as everyone makes out. And the big thing to note here is it's not a switch. It's not one or the other. You know, you've got, it's a scale. You can be a generalist and you can be a specialist and you can be anywhere within this field. But why is it that and there seems to be huge benefits of being both too. So why is it that it's so looked down upon of being a generalist than it is a specialist? And I think it's because it's so much easier to see the value in being a specialist. Because being an expert at something is an attractive thing, right? Like, society gives huge credibility to people with deep and narrow expertise about one particular thing. And it can be really profitable for that person. So you think of like doctors, lawyers, investment bankers, they can all charge top dollar for the knowledge they've acquired over all their years. If you think about it, if you're having heart surgery, you want someone who's studied it for years. You don't want Dave from work who's got it as a bit of a side hustle. You want a specialist for that particular task. But the problem is that becoming great and becoming an expert at one particular thing, it takes dedication, it takes practice, and most importantly, it takes a lot of time. And for the most part, there are no shortcuts to becoming like the best in your field. You have to put the time in. So if you take learning a new language, for example, the Spanish language has over 100,000 words in it. So that's a lot of words to learn, and it's going to take a lot of time to learn them all. But to be considered fluent in Spanish, you only need a vocabulary of around 2,500 words to have like a fluent conversation. So that means a relatively small amount of knowledge in this area can give you a large percent of the results that you're actually looking for. And this is known, some people know of the Pareto principle. I don't know, anyone heard of that? Yeah, so that states that on average, 20% of the efforts you put into it will give you back 80% of the results. And you can see, this is a bit of a weird graph, but basically, a short amount of time, you become a beginner. Add in more and more time, you start to learn more, but you can see the experience gained with the amount of effort needed is not a linear path. And if we're all working in roughly similar businesses, 20% of your clients tend to present around 80% of the business. 20% of the tasks you do on a daily basis will generate 80% of your productivity. And this is true of learning new skills. So, of course, there's a depth of experience you gain in dedicating yourself solely to one craft. And again, if you were a Spanish author, it would pay to become an expert in that field. But would it be more useful to learn every single word in Spanish or use that time to become fluent in 5 other languages? Is it better to carve a door a little bit better than what you did yesterday, or is it more beneficial to learn how to build the rest of the house? And then you could also spend all of your time becoming the best guitarist in the world, or would you become a better songwriter if you learned how to play the drums and the bass and the piano and everything else? So it's interesting to think of we've all got the same amount of time. How you spend that time, how does it become more beneficial to you? And research shows, that there are evolutionary benefits of being a specialist. So this is the sword-billed hummingbird. So these guys have spent generations becoming the best at the world at what they do. And what they can do is, because of the long beak that they've evolved into having, they can access the nectar right at the bottom of one particular flower. And because of this, they've got a huge advantage over all the other birds that can't access this nectar. So they are specialists in this field and they're the best, and it benefits them. But what happens when that flower disappears? Or what happens when another animal comes in and just eats the flower whole, and then all of a sudden you've got a very specific solution to a problem that doesn't exist anymore? Specialists tend to be very, very, very good at one singular thing, but if the thing they are good at gets wiped out, then in the animal kingdom, they tend to die off pretty quickly. And this is a great quote from Charles Darwin. It's not the strongest or the most intelligent who survive, it's those who can best manage change. So generalists, on the other hand, are great at finding different sources of food, surviving in different environments, and probably most importantly, are good at adapting to change. And we, as a species, as human beings, the reason we're at the top of the food chain is because we are generalists. We're very, very good at adapting to new surroundings and flourishing when we get there. So you might be thinking, well, how is this applicable to me as a creative? There are so many areas in creative, and I'd argue that the creative industry is one of the places where generalists probably flourish the most. Most of the time, the most effective solutions aren't necessarily the ones that are the best, but it's the ones that are the most unique. So when you think of the movie industry or music or any form of art really, it isn't really, most of the time, the best example of that art that becomes the most successful, it's usually something that has never come before. It's the most unique. And there are so many benefits of being a generalist, but I just want to go through a couple. So everyone's heard this phrase, when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So the problem with being in specialization is that specialists tend to get stuck in their own point of view because they've been taught to focus so narrowly on their own solutions. It can become difficult to look at it from different angles. We used to have some really, really great video creative directors at the New York Times, but every time you went to them with a challenge, their solution would always be a video, because that's what they know, and rightly so, that's what they hide for. And I realized one of the reasons I moved away from music is because I found myself retreating to kind of the same safe solution every time. I knew the chord progressions that would work for certain scenes and what instruments should be used, but all of a sudden my creativity became very narrow and focused, and I found it really limiting, and I didn't really like it. Technology is obviously advancing at a crazy pace, and people like to talk about AI coming around and it's going to steal everyone's jobs, and we're all going to have to serve the robots and everything else. But it also brings the opportunity of creating new opportunities and new industries and professions that didn't exist before. So if we as creatives can react quickly to those changes, the changes become opportunities instead of threats. And this is why generalists are typically more valued at smaller organizations because they're better at adapting to the faster pace. I worked at a really small agency in Leeds, and when I joined, I was like, I could do a bit of design, I could do a bit of motion and everything, and they had clients like Coca-Cola and Apple. I was like, this is it, like, I've made it now, this is my career. And I didn't know I'd joined a bit of a sinking ship, and they made a load of layoffs. I was like, oh shit, I'm out of here, this is... But because they're the guys who had done branding for like 20 years at this company, and those were the ones that got laid off because they were they weren't as valuable as me, who could do a couple of things. It felt really bad. And not only are different skills valuable, but there is also value in the connectivity between them. And I know in the previous talk, it was great to see that graphic where it had design and engineering and that connective tissue in the middle. I've got a very similar graph, and we should probably chat about that. But many studies have found that the best ideas emerge from combining different fields rather than focusing in one area. So Charles Babbage is the guy that invented the modern computer. And the first computers were actually punch cards with holes in. But this guy used to work in the silk weaving industry. And it was that knowledge of using cards to create patterns in silk fabric that inspired him to apply that to engineering. There was another guy called Harold Hildebrand, which is a great name. He worked in the technology to find oil based on seismic signals. So we'd send shockwaves through the ground to find where oil was stored. And eventually he switched his focus to music and used that knowledge on sonic and acoustics and started applying that same process to the human voice. And that's how auto-tune was invented. So I just find it crazy, like some of the best things come from places that you never would expect. So this is a very similar graph. You might have seen something very recently. But let's say you've got skill A and you've got skill B. Not only have you got those two tools in your arsenal, but you've also got this interconnecting piece in the middle. So that's only off 2. But let's say you've got 3 skills. All of a sudden, it starts to ramp up, and you've got all of these different skills at your disposal, and all of these different areas where you can take advantage. And that in itself is very, very beneficial as a creative. So my role is a bit of a strange. So I worked in branding. Has anyone heard of branded content? Do you work in branded content? Anyone? Well, branded content is a strange thing. It's because basically, at a publisher like the New York Times or like Time, clients will come to us, and it's beneficial for clients if a brand like the New York Times or Time talks about your brand in a favorable way. So Branded content is essentially journalism with product placement, so that a brand will pay us to talk about their products or service in a particular way. The only difference is it's obviously been endorsed by a brand. And a lot of clients come to us saying, we want a video, or we want VR, or the latest one like podcasts or meta. Who's sick of the metaverse already? It's like, yeah, we've got a Twitter feed, let's put it in the meta. It's like, no, I don't want to do it. So we have the same, we go back with the same answer every time. It's really, really important to figure out the story first and then how to tell it afterwards. Because even in the word itself, story comes before the telling. So I'll give you an example. We had a client once, I won't tell you which brand, but it was an airline in Thailand. And they came to us and they were like, we want to do this great VR film. We were like, fantastic, let's do it. What's the idea? And they're like, we want to interview our CEO. I was like, okay. I was like, why does this need to be VR? And that's the thing is, the majority of VR films would probably perform better just as normal videos. But they thought it was the best idea in the world. They're like, we'll get him on one of our jets and we'll interview him. And I couldn't think of a worse reason to put a VR headset on. It was just awful. So a jack of all trades is a master of none, and everybody knows that this is the saying, but there is a second part to this saying that not a lot of people know, and it's oftentimes better than a master of one. So when people think of this phrase, and it's always associated with negativity, like, I wouldn't have the career I've had so far if it wasn't for being a generalist. And I know that previous you were talking like being a generalist is so beneficial, especially in the creative industry. It's important to see it in a positive light. So hopefully I've given a decent defense of generalists today. And just to be clear, I want to be 100% clear because I think it's important, there is no right answer. Like, there are situations where you 100% want a specialist, but there are also situations where you 100% want a generalist. And there was a great quote I found when I was researching the talk, and it's that generalists change the world, specialists perfect it. And that's all I've got today. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
I've just sprung this on Graham because we've actually got a wee bit of time.
Yeah, I wrapped up earlier.
So I'll put you in the chair.
If my voice holds out.
If your voice holds out, yeah. Any questions for Graham? He's not expecting this. He's just rocked up and we're just stick him in a chair and we're going to ask him questions. Has anyone got any questions for Graham? So we've got a couple of minutes before we have a break. And you can have more coffee, I promise. Anything at all, don't be shy. Yes, we've got two. Okay, should we get our roving mics? Oh, look, there's a mic here. Thank you. And what's your favourite Take That song, by the way? I'm a huge Take That fan as well.
Well, yesterday, we wound the windows down.
Were you singing?
Yeah, we put on Never Forget.
Were you harmonising?
No, I was just shouting thin air because there was nothing coming out.
I've interviewed Take That. Can I just say lovely boys?
Oh, really?
Lovely boys. Mark's very
jealous.
sort of tiny. Jason's huge. Lovely guys. Right, sorry, we digress.
That's all good. You kind of brought up evolution and specialists. So specialists usually evolve out of competition in a certain marketplace. So like in that instance, the pollen is harder to get, so they have to evolve. In a big company where there's a lot of people doing a lot of roles and you are kind of forced to become a specialist in a way, how do you keep that mindset of being a generalist whilst there's a lot of competition around you for specialist roles?
Yeah, that's interesting. I know, does anyone work for Apple? Is any Apple employees? No. So I've spoken to a couple of people who work for Apple, and for a lot of designers, or even like a lot of people, it's like the gold standard of, and when I speak to some people...
Have you worked for them?
No, but when I speak to people that do, a lot of the time they get like shoehorned, like they work on one particular icon for 7 months, and that's all they do. And that's great if you're an icon designer and you like that one tick box that, you're obsessed with ticks, I don't know why. But like, if that's your gig, then that's great. But the people I've spoken to do say it can stifle the creativity in times. And that is a common challenge for a lot of big organizations, is that how do we keep the sort of conveyor belt going, but also keep people interested? So it's a really, really tough challenge, and one that I don't know if there is like a go-to solution for. But one thing that especially is rife in the creative industry is like side gigs and side hustles. Like a lot of people just nodded when I said that. Like how many people, show of hands, has got a side gig going?
What do you mean a side gig?
So like just something outside of your main role. Like,
oh, they're earning extra, aren't they?
Yeah, and well, not even earning. Like it could.
What do you think I'm doing?
But you don't even have to be earning. It could come from anything. So like you could be in a band, or you could be doing. We went to the Manchester Film Festival on Saturday, and same sort of thing. It's
so it was all face to face back in.
Yeah, we did a few screenings of some shorts. A friend of mine was a director there, and it was interesting talking to some of the directors because that is their side gig a lot.
Yeah.
But then sometimes that's where you get the best films. Like watch some of these things. So I think it's just important to recognize like what you can get out of your job as well. If you are stuck designing one tick on one icon for 7 months, I've never met anyone that did that, by the way. I just made that up. But,
who is this person?
Yeah, he's like sort of relieve that itch of your creativity itch elsewhere. I think it's just really, really important. Otherwise, you'll just burn out.
Nice question. I think there's one more. Was there one more at the back? Yeah, and then we'll go have coffee. Yeah. We'll take your mic over.
Hi, Graham. As someone who also describes himself as a bit of a jack of all trades, I'm just really interested. If somebody stops you or if you're interviewed, what do you describe yourself? What do you say your job title is, or what do you do?
Well, I tell you, I deleted a section from this presentation because I didn't think it was relevant. I wish I kept it in now. But basically, my dad's 85 years old. And he's called Graham. He's fitter than me. He can run faster than me, easy. But like most people sort of our age, my dad doesn't have a clue what I do for a living. And I've explained it to him a million times. I've given him like business cards. And it's like, so I tell him like I work for Time, and he's like, oh, so like you're a journalist? And I was like, no, like I tell stories and stuff, but it's more creative. It's more on the design side. And he's like, oh, so you design Time magazine? I'm like, nope. I was like, it's more interactive. It's like, I do more online stuff. And he's like, oh, so you build the website? Like, it's really, really tough sometimes to describe what you do for a living and like put.
So what's on your business card? Or you got different ones?
Yeah, it's VP of brand and creative for Time. But even that in itself, like, it's like that doesn't answer any questions really. What do you do?
Yeah.
So. The way I do it is I just say I work in the creative team for Time, because that in itself is broad enough, but it doesn't sort of limit you to one thing. Like I want to meet the guy who's got tick box icon designer for Apple. Like that'd be a business card. But
now we're obsessed with this guy.
Yeah, he doesn't even exist.
Or
I've just
girl.
made this up.
Let's not say that. It could be a girl.
Could be a girl.
Yeah.
Maybe it's my new job, and I could start designing tick boxes.
I think on that note, Graham has played an absolute stormer because he wasn't expecting this, so that's great. Ladies and gentlemen, say thank you to Graham. Thank you, Graham.